I'm about to tell you a story that's really personal. A story that led to me being in jail, all because I accepted a little money. Okay, well, a lot of money, but we'll get there. Before I really dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification, or your floor will turn into quicksand. Seriously, I've seen it happen. I was 2 years old when my mother told me that my dad had died from a boat accident, and we needed to move to a trailer park on the bad side of town because we didn't have enough money. But the worst part was my mom's health. She started losing it a bit. It was nearly impossible for her to keep a job, and she was always inviting these creeps over to be with her. When I was 5, one of her boyfriends told her she should sell me to the circus. And he was serious. When I was 12, I was getting food out of dumpsters just to have enough to eat some nights. And on my 13th birthday, when I woke up, there were loads of cards for me in the mail. And oddly, there was one strange envelope with just my first name on it. I opened the envelope and there was $300 inside. I was shocked. I had never seen that much money in my life. I ripped out the letter to see who it was from, but all it said was, "Use this wisely, pretty girl." Now that I'm older, those words send a shiver down my spine. But at the time, I was stoked. I bought a ton of food with it and stuffed the food in my closet and under my bed. It looked like the snack aisle at the grocery store had exploded all over my room. But that was just the beginning. The envelope started coming once a week. First, it was $300, then it was $400, $500, even $600. Sometimes there was a note attached, and then sometimes there was just a smiley face. Of course, I didn't tell my mom about this. I took the money and bought myself everything I wanted. New toys, dozens of trips to the movie theater, entire afternoons in the arcade. I felt like a different person. Whenever I saw the bills piling up, I would secretly send cash in to pay for them. I shouldn't have had to do that as a 13-year-old, but I'm glad I did. To celebrate, I even bought myself a gaming system. Every time my mom would ask me how I got the money, I'd tell her, "My friend gave it to me," and she would say, "Okay." I once tried to give her money so she could buy some pretty clothes, but she refused and said, "I don't need your friend's money. I'm happy the way I am." So I tried sending her an anonymous envelope that was full of money, but she rejected the money and asked me to donate it to the church and that she wants to stay poor and not accept charity. I had to respect her for that. Rejecting free money when you're poor is extremely hard. Believe me, I know. So I stopped trying to give her money. One day, one of the letters said, "You're beautiful now. I love watching you." Now, that made me want to puke. For the first time, I really began to wonder who was sending me this money. Was it some stalker? Was it Mike, my mom's creepy ex? I started closing my blinds and barely leaving the house. Around that same time, I realized the letters were always coming on Sundays. So, one Saturday night, I sat out in the yard behind a tree, watching the mailbox. Hours passed that seemed like days, and around 4 a.m., I saw a car pull up. My heart was beating out of my chest. I could see a man in the front seat, but he was wearing some kind of mask. He got out to put the letter in the mailbox, and I stood up and sprinted towards him. He acted like I was about to murder him. He ran into the car and locked the doors. I hit the side of the window trying to tell him I just wanted to meet him, but he tried driving off. I held onto the door with all of my might, but he was just driving too fast. I got dragged for a few feet, and then I crashed onto the road as he took off, leaving me there. I busted my face open and had to go to the hospital to get stitches. Of course, I looked like a freak with a giant gash on my face, and I was definitely going to have a bad scar for a long time. The hospital bills were stupid expensive, so I was really excited to head home and get my next letter. But when I opened it, there was no money inside. The note read, "Never do that again. If they find us, we're in trouble." I knew that instant that I was never going to try and see who the man was again. By the time I entered high school, I wanted to date, so I asked one of my classmates out, and he took one long look at me and said, "No, you're ugly." I was really struggling. With a massive scar on my face, no one really wanted to date me. On my way home from school most days, I would cry. But then I realized the power that I had. My mysterious letter sender had started putting $5,000 in every week. I started buying things for my classmates. The most popular girl got a new iPhone from me. Some other kids got skateboards, Gucci clothes, and even sneakers worth hundreds of dollars. Suddenly, everybody wanted to be my friend. Even Leo, the hottest boy in school. I had been crushing on him since I was 6, and he was finally giving me the time of day. I bought him watches, hats, golf clubs. I took us out to dinner every single night, and we dined like kings. I was living the dream. Soon, our entire friend group was decked out in nice clothes, and people around the school started asking me for money and things. I wanted people to like me, so I just gave people what they wanted. But that didn't go over too well. One day, during lunch, I got called into the principal's office, in front of everyone. When I got inside, the principal started asking me where I was getting all this money. Even worse, he said, "Your grades aren't good enough to make this kind of money at a job." I couldn't believe he would say something so terrible. I didn't need this. I stood up and told him it was none of his business and he could shove it, which went about as well as you'd expect. I got suspended for talking back to him, which wouldn't be a big deal except he was going to call my mom that afternoon. I've never run faster in my life. I burst into our house to find my mom asleep on the couch. I took her phone from her purse and blocked the school's number, but while I was holding it, she got a text. It read, "You owe me $2,500 or we're going to have a problem." When I scrolled further up to see all the previous messages, I was shocked. Apparently, my mom had been buying illegal goods from some random guy, and he did not seem friendly. So I did what I knew I had to do. I texted him that I'd meet him at a local park and drop off the money. He insisted we do it at night, and I was insanely nervous, but I agreed. I sat in the park in the dark, and a sketchy car drove up. Then a buff guy stepped out and charged over to me. I thought he was going to jump me or something. He stopped and asked why the heck I was there. I handed him the money, my hands shaking, and told him to stop talking to my mom. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He said he was going to talk to whoever he wanted to. Frustrated, I handed him an extra $1,000, and he was shocked. He said he'd stay away, thankfully. Those next few days stuck at home with my mom was a nightmare. I pretended I had a cold so I couldn't go to school. Of course, she had guys over. I was disgusted hearing her make out with them, so I snuck out the window. I ended up spending a lot of my time with Leo. He thought it was super cool I got expelled, and honestly, he made me feel like the coolest person ever. We went to the mall and shopped together every day. When he asked me to be his girlfriend, I was so happy. I posted a picture of us together, but he asked me to take it down because his parents would ground him for having a girlfriend. One day, he showed me a car he really wanted. He said I'd be the greatest girlfriend ever if I bought it for him, and I told him I would. I had thousands and thousands of dollars saved up, so who cared? When I got home that same day, I had a letter, but it wasn't a Sunday, so I was surprised. I was even more surprised when I opened the envelope and it was a huge letter. The letter said that Leo was cheating on me with Rebecca, one of our classmates. My mysterious money sender told me to stop my relationship with him immediately. I felt so grossed out. How long had he been following me? Was he actually watching my every move? For the first time, the reality that some dude had been watching me my whole life started to sink in. But was he right about Leo? I texted Leo to hang out the next day, but he told me he had plans. I immediately went over to Rebecca's house and sat behind a tree, just out of sight. And you know what I saw? Leo and her in the backyard, laying by the pool and making out. My stomach turned. I couldn't believe it. I inched closer to hear what they were talking about, and Rebecca was talking about how ugly I was. Leo laughed and agreed with her, saying he was just in it for the money. I had never been that mad before in my life. Frustrated, I stormed off and decided I needed to get revenge in the best way possible. The next morning, my suspension from school was officially up. When I pulled up to the school, I felt like $1,000,000 because I was pulling up in the exact car that Leo wanted. He was so stoked at first, thinking it was a surprise for him, so he ran to me and asked for the key. But then I dropped the bomb on him in front of everyone. We're over. This car is a gift for myself because I tolerated you all this time. I've never seen someone get that embarrassed. People were laughing at him and asking me if they could get in my car and go for a spin. And I deserved all that praise because buying the car was not easy. They were super nervous about taking all cash from a 16-year-old. And I get it, it probably looked a little sketchy, but it was my money, one way or another. Now all I had to worry about was hiding the car from my mom, or so I thought. When I came back from taking the car for a spin, there were police all over the place. They yanked me out of the car and put me in handcuffs. It felt like I was in a nightmare. I asked what this was about, and the cops told me it was for using and distributing counterfeit money. I was spiraling. The money I had been given all those years was fake? Who the heck was sending me it? Were they trying to set me up? I tried to explain through tears on the way to the police station, but they weren't having it. When I finally got there, they put me in a cold, dark room and started interrogating me. I knew I couldn't keep my secret anymore. I told them about all the letters and about how long I had been getting them. I even told them about all the things I had spent the money on. At first, they didn't seem like they believed me, but as they continued interrogating me, they realized my story hadn't changed. After 8 hours, they let me out with a plan in mind. They'd stake out the house on a Sunday, block the road, and catch the person behind this. When I walked out, my mom was standing there. She knew everything now, and she was not happy. When I told her I'd been paying our bills, she looked a bit ashamed. We didn't talk the entire ride home. When Sunday came, we both sat in the living room with the blinds open, waiting to see it all happen. I felt sick to my stomach. I was giving up someone who had changed my life, someone who had helped me so much over the years. His car pulled up, and all the police lights flashed on. I started to cry, and I bolted out of the house to see him. I needed to apologize for all of this. He tried to drive away from the cops, and a huge chase started. The cops had either side of the road blocked off, but he was ramming into cars, desperate to get out. Sparks were flying everywhere, car alarms were going off. He was even tearing up people's yards. Finally, the cops chased his car into our front yard. They pinned him against the side of the house and yanked him out. I called out to him, apologizing while the cops held me back. Then the cops ripped off his mask, and my world fell apart. I recognized the man underneath the mask. It wasn't one of my mom's ex-boyfriends. It wasn't a neighbor. It was my dad. My dad, who had died when I was 2. Now, it was him apologizing. My mom and I stood there in absolute shock while they put him in the cop car. When we found out the real story, I couldn't believe it. After I was born, my mom and dad were fighting a lot. The stress of raising a family was apparently too much for him, so he left for work one day and faked his own death by crashing a boat. He had a float with him to get to shore, and that's when he started a whole new life. He couldn't get a job without an ID, so he started making counterfeit money to get himself by. By the time he realized how unhappy he was and how much he missed us, he thought it was too late to come back. Instead, he watched us from a distance. He knew about my mom's issues, so he gave me the money to take care of us. He had watched every birthday party, every game, every trip I had ever taken, and now he was going to jail for 20 years. Now all the money I had was gone, and I was poor again. I can lie and say I'm happier now without the money, but I'm not. And I also lost all my friends because everyone thinks my father is a mob boss. But yesterday, I received a mysterious envelope with a ton of cash inside, and to be honest, I don't know what to do.
It was getting dark as I took food out to my dog Charlie in the backyard. I hated being outside at night. Seriously, I believe in ghosts and witches and all kinds of stuff that my mom always makes fun of me for. It's just her and me living together, and she makes me feed Charlie as part of my chores. I'd like to see how she feels when a street criminal gets me one of these nights. She'll cry over my casket at the funeral about how she wished she'd never made me go outside at night. I was so busy imagining that, I nearly jumped out of my skin when Charlie started barking. I looked around but didn't see anything. Must be a cat or something. I told him to be quiet and gave him his food. Then I heard a rustling behind me. I gasped, searching the darkness. Nothing. As I walked back to the house, the wind rushed through the trees, and Charlie barked again. I was getting so freaked out now. Standing in my yard, half hidden by the bushes, was a nun. I'm not even kidding. A nun, silently staring at me. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I repeated over and over, backing away, looking around for anything I could use as a weapon. I had a creepy ghost nun in my yard, and now she was going to murder me and hide my body where my mom would never find it. I screamed for help, and the nun turned and fled into the shadows. My mom came running, asking what was wrong. I started to tell her, then I realized if I told her I'd seen a nun, she would definitely think I was crazy and probably have me locked up. So I said I thought I'd seen a person in the yard. She said it was probably my imagination and to go to bed. But I know what I saw. The next day at school, I couldn't wait to tell my friend Tara what had happened. I thought she'd be so freaked out, but she just laughed at me and said I watched way too many horror movies. By lunchtime, other people at school had heard that I thought a creepy nun was stalking me, and they were teasing me too. Nobody believed me. That night I couldn't sleep. I pulled the covers over my head, so afraid that if I looked, I would see the nun standing over my bed. I didn't really know anything about nuns. My parents used to be religious, but my mom never went to church anymore. All I knew about them was from movies. I decided I had to face my fears, and I went outside. I looked all around the yard, but no one was there. Over the next few days, I started to relax. Maybe the nun had been my imagination. Tara continued to tease me about it. Any more visits from the creepy nun? I was starting to get mad at her. Sometimes she wasn't a very good friend, and sometimes she can be really mean. I didn't have any other friends though, so I hung around with her. One night when I was feeding Charlie, he started barking again. I turned, and there was the nun, partly hidden in the bushes. I resisted the urge to scream, just in case I was crazy and hallucinating. "What do you want?" I demanded. She stepped forward. "Jenny," she said, "don't be afraid." I started screaming like a little girl for a moment. Okay, I was beyond freaked. "How do you know my name?" "Come closer," she said. No way." But something about her made me want to. I'd been thinking of her as an old, scary-looking woman, but now I could see she was younger and actually kind of pretty. She told me that her name was Mary, and she was my godmother. Huh? She'd been my mom's best friend, but they'd had a fight many years ago and hadn't spoken since. Mary had joined a strict convent where she wasn't allowed to visit friends or family, but lately she'd become so lonely that she started sneaking away from the convent. "I wanted to meet you," she said. "I haven't seen you since you were a baby." "Why not just call my mom like a normal person?" I asked. She said she wasn't sure my mom would ever forgive her or let her see me. "Please," she begged. "This has to be our little secret." At first, I was like, no way. How did I know she was telling the truth? What if she was actually an undercover criminal? But part of me was really excited to have this secret. I got so bored living with just my mom. No friends except Tara, who I didn't even like most of the time. Now, I could keep this secret from Mom, and it would serve her right for keeping Mary a secret from me. Mary and I talked for a little bit. I asked questions about the convent. Life there sounded so strict. "Why don't you just leave?" I asked. She said she had made a vow to God, and she couldn't break it. I saw a light go on in my mom's bedroom, and I realized I needed to get back inside. Mary asked if she could visit me again tomorrow, and I said yes. She gave me the number for the cell she kept secret from the convent. Mary started visiting most nights. I would tell her about my boring life, how my mom never let me do anything except chores, how Tara was mean to me. Mary was a great listener. I expected her to be uptight, being a nun and all, but she was actually so fun to hang out with. My mom noticed I seemed happier, but I wouldn't tell her why. It was my secret. One day, after Tara had been teasing me again, Mary asked if I wanted to play a prank on her. Late that night, we went to Tara's house. I showed Mary which window was Tara's. Mary went to the window and started tapping with her fingernail. I was trying so hard not to laugh. Finally, Tara's lamp went on, and I could see her sit up in bed. The expression on her face when she saw a nun at her window was priceless. She started screaming her head off. Mary and I ran as fast as we could home, where we collapsed with laughter. The next day, all Tara would talk about was the creepy nun visiting her, and how it was probably an omen that she was going to die. She was such a drama queen. After school, I texted Mary that my mom was running errands for a couple hours, so she could come over. She wasn't sure she would be able to sneak away from the convent right then, but about half an hour later, she showed up, and I brought her into the house. She looked around like she couldn't believe her eyes. She stared at the photos on the shelves, especially the ones of my mom. "I miss her so much," she said. She admitted she didn't really like life in the convent anymore. She missed the real world, and she was sad she hadn't gotten to see me grow up. "Why don't you try talking to my mom?" I said. "It's been years now. She'd probably forgive you." But Mary said she wasn't ready yet. I told her about the terrible day I'd had. I'd flunked a quiz, and Tara had ignored me to hang out with more popular girls. Mary cheered me up in no time. I realized I've never had anyone like this in my life before, someone I could rely on to always listen to me. We were so deep in conversation, I didn't even hear the key in the door until it was too late. Suddenly, my mom was standing in the doorway, staring at Mary like she'd seen a ghost. Mary and I both leapt to our feet. Mary stared at my mom too, and I held my breath. What would happen? Would they fight? Or would they finally talk it out? Of all the things I imagined, I definitely didn't expect what Mary said next. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. I thought I misheard. Why would my godmother call my mother Mom? My mom wasn't saying anything, so I started talking. "Why didn't you tell me I had a godmother? What did you guys even fight about anyway? Can't you just make up?" But my mom didn't answer any of those questions. Instead, she said to me, "She's not your godmother. She's your sister." I couldn't speak, could barely even breathe. How could that be true? I turned to Mary. "What is she talking about?" I asked. "You're not my sister." But Mary just kept staring at my mom, tears in her eyes. And that's when I knew it was true. How could they both have lied to me? I didn't know whose betrayal hurt worse, my mom's or Mary's. "I have a sister and you didn't tell me?" I shouted at my mom. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and started to tell the story. She and my dad had Mary when my mom was very young. They'd been a very religious family. When Mary was 18 and I was just a baby, Mary got pregnant and my parents disowned her. My mom still wanted to see her sometimes, but my dad sent Mary to a convent and told her never to come back. For years, Mary had lived in the convent, never seeing her friends or family. She had emailed Mom once, letting her know that her baby had been born and adopted. Mom wrote back and told Mary that she and my dad were raising me, without telling me that I had a sister. Writing that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, my mom said, but it was what your dad wanted. But what Dad had done broke up their marriage and caused my mom to lose her faith. She stopped going to church, and she and my dad divorced. She said there were so many times over the years where she wanted to tell me about Mary, wanted to invite Mary to come back home, but it seemed too late. She thought Mary would hate her forever. Mary was crying by the time the story was done. She said she wanted to come home. They talked like I wasn't even there, and I felt myself getting madder and madder. My mom said that if Mary decided to break her vow to the convent, she could come here and live in the guest room until she found a place of her own. Yeah, right. Too little, too late. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "She can't stay here," I shouted. "You lied to me. I hate you both." Then I stormed upstairs and shut myself in my room. I cried most of the night. This was such a huge shock, and I couldn't believe that my new friend, the person I'd come to trust so much, was just as much of a liar as my parents. I never wanted to speak to either of my parents or Mary again. Mary texted and called the next few days, but I ignored her. At school one day, Tara apologized for making fun of me about the creepy nun. She said she was still scared every time she went to bed. I remembered playing that prank with Mary, and I almost smiled. But I knew I should tell Tara the truth. I told her the whole story about Mary, hoping she would be supportive. But when I was done, all she would talk about was how crazy my family was, and how it was like something from TV. She wasn't really interested in how I felt. She just liked what juicy gossip my life was. That's when I realized I didn't want to throw away my friendship with Mary. I had wished for a sister my whole life, and now I had one. I didn't want to forgive her, but maybe I could at least give her a chance to explain. So I called her that night and we talked for a long time. She said she lied because she knew if she told me she was my sister, there's no way I would keep her visits a secret from my mom. I didn't know what to do, she said. I just felt so alone, and I couldn't stand the thought that I had a sister out there that I didn't know at all. I wanted to meet you without causing drama. Well, you caused a lot of drama, I said. I know. Do you think you could ever give me another chance? I knew this wouldn't be easy for any of us, but if my mom was willing to try to let Mary back into our lives, then maybe I could try too. You're my sister, I told her. That was so weird to say. We're family. That seemed to make her really happy. You're my sister, she said back to me. She promised to visit Mom and me the next day. I fell asleep still hearing those words. You're my sister. Maybe now she and I would both feel less alone in the world.